On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, money and relationships.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Shawn Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Shawn Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and welcome back your financial coach, George Corbello. Welcome, George.
Oh, I like that. He introduced me, but yes, welcome back is a good thing. What's up, buddy?
Not much. How you doing?
Doing well. Working through some fall and winter programs with some of the local libraries, so very excited about that. I did see that your college football team had a good victory against a team.
They're a legitimate team. Now, again, as we record this, week 0 of the college football season is over. But I think by the time this gets released, we'll be in week 2 or 3. So we'll see how my beloved Noles are doing after this weekend's LSU game. Hopefully, we'll be celebrating a win by the time this episode comes out, but exactly. I guess we'll see. I did go to the home opener, by the way, and I got on TV. So those of you that are connected with me on Facebook, you can see all those pictures. It was in the middle of the third quarter. My cell phone starts exploding with, "Hey, we saw you on TV," and screen captures of me and my boys and a friend of mine, Brian, who's been on the show before, Condo Association, HOA attorney, him and his son. He's been on the podcast before, and so the 5 of us went up to Tallahassee for the home opener, got tickets from a client of mine, and got on TV. So I'm a celebrity now.
Dude, that's it. You've made it. Your 15 seconds starts now. Let's go.
As if the podcast didn't make me famous enough, right?
That's true, but you want to go to the next level, so you got to get on television.
There you go. So a couple of admin things we want to get out of the way. First is our sponsor, Sam Cohen, owners of Attorneys First Insurance, where they write errors and omissions protection, liability protection, E&O, malpractice, insurance coverage for attorneys and title companies all over the country. Now, I know that Sam has asked for specifically attorneys and title companies in Florida, in Texas, and now in Alaska, which is, I got to talk to him about how and why he's targeting Alaska, but I know he can write policies all over the country, and he can even write policies for attorneys and title companies that have had claims in the past. So whether you have a clean malpractice record, whether you have a little bit of turbulence there, a little bit of smudge on your record, Sam can find you a policy and get you insurance. So a great way to support the show would be to support Sam, and a great way to support Sam would be to refer him in a title company or an attorney that you know that is either starting up or looking to renew their policy. But speaking of a great way to support the show, we just launched our Patreon page. And so I think you go to, was it patreon.com/crushingdebt, I think?
That is correct.
Is the website. But again, I'll put that in the notes. But we have a Patreon page up and running. So Patreon would be a way to support the show. The show does cost some money, which is why we have sponsors. And you know what? We want to try to improve the show for all of you. We want to try to take the show to the next level. So if you're interested in throwing us a few bucks, great. If you're interested at the various levels, we've got things like, I think at the highest level is one-to-one time with either of us or both of us. Right. We've got one of the levels is guaranteed seating when we do start opening it up for webinars and seminars, guaranteed pricing or no pricing, free for webinars or seminars if you're a patron. We've got, what are some of the other things?
Live Q&A that we're thinking about as well with some of the listeners there. We're thinking, again, spot, if you want to sponsor itself and just have spot advertisements, we can, you can have us deal with a specific topic that you want, come on the show. It's just all sorts of things that we're looking to kind of put out there.
All different levels, all different ways to support us and support the show, or you can just continue to listen to the free content every week as it comes out. But we would appreciate, whatever you feel inclined to provide us with. So now that we got those admin topics out of the way, I'm a part of a couple of different bankruptcy attorney Facebook groups, and there was a kind of a funny post in one of them, and this kind of leads into what George wanted to talk about, which is money and relationships. So it's going to be kind of a, I hope, funnier episode, but we'll also try to distill some nuggets here for you. So let me just read you what this attorney posted. Her question was, what's the most valuable life lesson you've learned from a client? And what her lesson was that you never sit in a corner between your clients, always sit nearest the exits, and if possible, make your clients sit next to each other. Now, I'm not going to read her post word for word, but She says, when I was a freshly minted attorney, I was doing client meetings at a bulk bankruptcy filing firm. A wife and husband came in for an appointment to discuss a motion for relief on their home. Now, a motion for relief is when you file a bankruptcy and the bank says, well, we want permission from the bankruptcy court to get out of this bankruptcy and pursue foreclosure because maybe the bank isn't being paid.
They're not getting paid.
Subsequent to filing.
Yep.
So the conference rooms were small without much room to move around. I was the last person in, and the only remaining seat was next to the husband with my back to a corner. The way the wife had positioned herself in front of the door prevented her from sitting there, and she had to sit next to the husband. The wife was a very imposing woman approaching 6 feet, and she was as round as she was tall. Husband was a tiny man, maybe 5'5", and 130 pounds, soaking wet with rocks in his pockets. Love that description. Wife was really worked up and didn't understand why the lender was saying they weren't current. She had given her husband money to buy money orders to send in the mortgage payment. I was young, so I didn't see the flashing warning signs foretelling impending doom. Instead of preparing myself for what was to come, I naively pulled out the pay history and began going through it with the wife. The husband had been very quiet and nervous through the entire ordeal, another warning sign I failed to heed. After a few moments of going through the pay history, the wife suddenly realized what must have happened. Without any warning, the wife jumped across the table and grabbed the husband by the shirt and began screaming and swearing at him. I've never seen a woman her size, or any size for that matter, move so quick. At this point, I'm a little afraid. I was not a big woman, and I have no way out. Using my powers of persuasion, I convinced the wife to let go of her husband because whatever he did, it wasn't worth going to jail over. I told her that he probably has it coming, but if she gives it to him in my office, I will have to call the police.
Oh, no.
The wife let the husband go, but kept yelling, "What did you do with my money?" I'm still not quite sure what happened or what the wife did when they left. So,
ouch.
You know, kind of goes back. We had that conversation a couple weeks ago about the 5 money rules. And what was that one about make sure that you and the person you're dating have the same views about money, something like that.
That might be a good idea. But this is taking it to a whole level. I mean, the biggest problem we have, we get it. If talking about money is difficult, going into dating, let alone. But if you're in marriage, if you're married with your spouse, you've taken the commitment, right? Having a conversation about money, especially if we're having trouble, maybe it's not so easy, but so important, man. And this is obviously taking it to a new level,
right,
of where is my money. I love the response, but it's still got to talk to each other, and But I don't know. Is it worth maybe going to jail to get a punch in? Maybe.
Well, you wouldn't go to jail just for a single punch. I don't think. That's not my legal advice. I don't think you'd go to jail unless maybe it was like a punch to the throat or something
Gotcha.
the fatal punch.
Okay,
I don't think you'd go to jail for that. But, the other thing that it kind of brings up, it's a funny story. I get it. There's other funny stories that we're going to go over.
Plenty.
But, what is the responsibility here of the wife? If she's just giving the husband money, why isn't she checking that the mortgage is being paid? I mean, she should have access to the mortgage statements just like anybody else.
Yeah, I think we get into those modes where it's like, that's that person's problem. Like, I don't like paying the bills, or I don't like, the numbers or the budget itself. But we put our full trust in our partner to be able to manage those items itself. So, that kind of infidelity, where the money is going itself, but that lack of trust, if we lose that as part of our money relationship, that can cost. I mean, if you think about it as a wife, if you go into divorce, again, I'm not an expert here, but if you're not managing the money or having something that's set aside for you, you can be in a, like starting over from scratch,
right,
in a divorce. So I think those are the things, like being more intentional and understanding where the money is between the couple, I feel is so important as part of the relationships.
Right. And I get it. There needs to be that level of trust there. But again, I mean, I don't know that it hurts to jump onto the mortgage company website, and just make sure that everything's being paid on time.
I mean, we have the convenience on our apps, right? You can just go to our banking app and just look to see that there was a payment movement. Right. I mean, geez, just little things like that. Oof.
Yeah. There's some other, though, funny response. So I jumped in on this chain, and I'll tell you what I said. But there were some other funny responses to this post. So another attorney wrote, I once was conducting a 341 meeting. Now, again, I've talked about 341 meetings on the show. In fact, one of my very first episodes, the very first episode idea I don't remember if it ended up being episode number 1 or not, but the very first episode idea I had for the podcast was a funny story about the 341 and why I will always call it the meeting of creditors. It's section 341 of the bankruptcy code. Attorneys call it the 341 meeting. And I don't know if I told you this ever or not, George, but I once had a client, her 341 meeting was at 2:00 and she no-showed. And she ended up coming into the office angry at me. And when I asked her why, she said, well, I was there at 3:41 in the afternoon and no one else was.
Oh, boy. Okay.
And from that point on, I said, no, let's call it the meeting of creditors.
Right.
Under Section 341 of the code. It's not a meeting that occurs at 3:41 in the afternoon. So anyway, I once was conducting a 341 meeting back when they were in person and asked, are either of you required to pay child support or alimony to someone else? Wife says no. Husband says yes. Wife does a double take.
Okay, that's a little awkward to find out.
Here's the one that I posted. I think this has happened to many of us. I was preparing a petition and asked how much the wife's engagement ring was worth. The husband went silent and started to look down and kind of muttered under his breath, it's a fake. So I guess, he could have said that because if it's fake, it's not worth as much as if it was real.
Right, it's okay.
I just don't think these clients were that smart. But I've heard plenty of stories about wives learning that the engagement rings that they got are not real diamonds when you're sitting in front of a bankruptcy attorney.
Well, it's a good way to start our relationships, guys. So let's go back to that dating episode again.
Absolutely. Here's another one. Here's one that I thought was funny. Our Chapter 7 trustee tells a story about a 341 meeting she was conducting. That day, an imprisoned debtor came in that they knew was going to lie through his teeth, so they posted extra warnings all over the place about bankruptcy fraud. The imprisoned debtor had his meeting and lied through his teeth as expected. Soon after that, a couple came up to the table for their meeting. The wife was bigger than her husband in this case as well. The trustee asked how many dependents they had. Wife says 3. Husband, worried about bankruptcy fraud, says 4.
Oh, yeah.
Who is this extra dependent and how old are they? Apparently, the husband had an extramarital affair and a child outside of the marriage that the wife didn't know about. Trustee said she let the wife take a few swings before paging the marshals.
Good for her.
She then took a breath and told the room that if there's anything you need to disclose to your spouse, perhaps it's better to do it during a quick break before the hearings resume.
Yeah, do it before and after. Well, at least the signs were working.
Yeah. I've told our clients, bankruptcy is an open book.
Yeah.
And so it's got to be an open book. And a lot of times, I've always said divorce attorneys are good referrals for me because a lot of times if the parties are amicable. Now, if they're fighting, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
But if they're amicable, I can bankrupt both while they're still married, wipe the slate clean of the debts, and then they can finish off the divorce.
Sure.
And that way they start free from each other, free from their debts. But again, this kind of stuff needs to be discussed because if I do represent husband and wife and one of them tells me something that they don't want to tell the other, now I'm in a conflict of interest situation.
Yeah, that's a problem.
So better to come clean than let me figure it out or let a trustee figure it out.
Shawn, but coming clean, it's the easiest thing we can do, right? Again, the problem we run into in our relationships is we feel like there's this conversation that we don't want to have. Money puts us in that situation, especially when we're struggling or in that crisis mode itself. Having that money conversation to go, how do we get out of this? How do we do these kind of things? It's tough. It's a tough conversation to have, but boy, I've had a few clients, we're having the conversations in those first kind of consults and, the faces. I don't go in into the legal realm itself, but the faces of like, oh, I'm not that bad of a spender, or I don't do that, and the quick takes that are there. It's like, okay, there's the red flag. I think I try to listen to some of those red flags to kind of like, okay, let's deep dive into those conversations, and there shouldn't be any shame in that. Like, no, like let's talk. Let's see where that goes, because the more we understand, the better we can actually have a plan or do something that, maybe takes us into a better place with our money.
Yeah. I think that if you can't talk to your spouse about these types of issues, you got deeper problems.
Yeah, there's
anyway.
Bigger problems already.
There's a couple of funny stories in here. I went to bankruptcy court with a client years ago and sat all the way on the other side of the bench from her. She absolutely reeked from cigarette smoke.
Oh, okay.
I told you when I first started up the law firm that I was in a client meeting and the woman just undressed and started breastfeeding her kid.
Okay.
Her
Well, there you go.
Which I don't mind. My wife breastfed as best she could. I know other moms that breastfeed. I have nothing against breastfeeding, but
You provide a very comfortable environment for her. That's right.
apparently, I just don't want you whipping it out in front of me when I don't know who you are.
Jeez, oh boy.
So I don't, I'll leave the room. I'll let you
Right,
go to
just-
an office we can
exactly.
close or a bathroom. Just don't.
Need a minute?
Wow. Here's another one who actually reminds me of another funny story I know. When I was a newbie associate, I put up with a verbal assault following a 341 meeting from an irate client who had converted from Chapter 13 to 7 and blamed my boss for, quote, losing his house. He followed me while shouting all the way through the lobby of the federal building in front of the security guards who stared and did nothing and out onto the sidewalk. I realized later that I should have walked right back into the meeting room when he started shouting. You live, you learn.
Right.
It reminds me of a story that I heard from a former law partner of mine. We were doing a bankruptcy for a divorcing couple, but we were only representing I can't remember, either the wife, they had not yet been divorced, or they were just recently divorced, ex-wife, whatever. And so we're representing the wife. Well, every creditor gets notice that these meetings are going on. So the husband or ex-husband was there. And as the trustee was asking the wife questions, the husband would pop up and say, well, what about that diamond ring I gave you? Which, of course, she never disclosed to us, so it wasn't on the petition. What about this asset? What about that asset? And the trustee was like, oh, yeah, what about that asset? And what about that
Let me
ring?
keep
And what
writing.
about, what about that stuff? Well, the client totally broke down, was completely in tears, was just a mess. And so my partner was walking her out. My former law partner was walking her out. And this guy was jumping up and down like he had just won the Super Bowl. And, you lied, and I got you, and you deserve what's coming, and you're going to lose all your stuff. And I'm sure a lot more colorful language
Of course,
than that.
yeah.
So my law partner then sort of stops and turns around and faces him and says, can you please leave and let me walk, your ex-wife back to her car. At that point, he gets in my law partner's face, who he was not a small guy. He was a fairly big, athletic guy.
Okay.
Well, the security guards in the federal courthouse are not security guards. They're federal marshals.
Oh, okay.
In the state courthouse, they're sheriffs.
Okay.
In the federal courthouse, they're federal marshals. And they know us, or at least did at the time, because we were in there all the time doing these meetings.
Sure.
So they knew who we were. Well, the marshals saw the husband get in my law partner's face, and the way he described it, you could see that they were like, oh, here we go. And they unclipped their tasers and they unclipped their batons.
Getting ready.
And they go walking over and, is everything okay here, sir? And my law partner was like, well, is it?
Right.
And the ex-husband looked at my law partner, looked at the guards who were all like, please, we don't use this stuff enough. Let us use this stuff on you. And he ended up walking out by himself, and the marshals allowed my partner and the client to wait, and then ended up just kind of monitoring that they all got back to their cars okay. But that's what the marshals are for. If you're ever in a courthouse, whether it be federal courthouse, state courthouse, look for the guys in uniform. If you ever feel unsafe, that's what they're there for.
That makes sense there.
They're there to protect you. So you don't have to. You could do what this lady said and go back into the courtroom and wait, or just tell one of the marshals or one of the sheriffs,
help.
I don't feel safe. Can you please help me? It's not really the same thing, but there have been more than a few times when either the husband had to admit that he was paying child support to someone else, or when one spouse surprised the other with a revelation about gambling losses.
That's the infidelity, right? You talk about child support, kids. How do you hide it? I guess the truth always comes out, but how do you hide it? I guess jumping through hoops to do that. But gambling, obviously some of these addictions and stuff that people hide the money, spend the money. But once again, if you're not plugged into your finances, how do you look and know months into the process that you're starting to realize, wait, something is wrong? If we're plugged in and having the conversations with our partners, we should be saying, hey, like, where's the money went? Where's the spend? Where's these kind of things happening? But we just this blind faith that we have. I love my wife too, but we got to talk. We got to talk about the finances. Where does she need money? Where do I need money? That kind of thing itself. So we're on the same page each week, each month.
Well, and you're not being accusatory by saying where's the money. You can do it in a constructive way. Hey, let's sit down and talk about the budget. That's what I got to learn to do.
Okay, thanks for the tip. There you go.
Not where's the money.
Where's the money? Sorry. That's why, again, I'm still learning myself. Okay.
Although it does kind of drive me nuts when I spent it all on groceries. Yeah, you did, but we had a half a bag of grapes that are perfectly good, and you bought a whole other bag of grapes.
I like eating.
Could have saved, at this point, the price of grapes. We could have saved, what, $20 and bought something else.
Oh, here we go. Inflation talk again.
Here's the last one in this chain. An attorney I know well told me this story. Wife comes in to file bankruptcy for her husband. Foreclosure was scheduled, and he was out of town on a work trip and couldn't possibly get back. Looking into it, he had filed before, and they were going to have to move to extend the stay. So if you file a case that gets dismissed and file a new one, you've got to ask the court to extend the bankruptcy stay. Otherwise, it expires after 30 days. We insisted that husband had to come in. She had a power of attorney, but it looked like it had been downloaded from the internet and was defective. The night before foreclosure, husband is still, quote, on his work trip, and she can't get him on the phone. She's crying in the office. Can't we just file it and he can sign it later? The last lawyer let her file with her power of attorney. We advised her to go back to that lawyer. Now that's, a big red flag in and of itself, using a power of attorney to file for someone else.
Yep.
Finally, as my friend is getting ready to leave on foreclosure eve, she calls and says her husband is on his way to the office when not 2 hours earlier he was in Chicago on a work trip and no way he can make it back in time. They come in together. The attorney takes the husband into the conference room by himself, made the wife wait in the lobby. Number one, the husband had no idea his house was up for foreclosure. Number two, he gives money to his wife to pay the mortgage every month. Wow. Number three, I must be mistaken because they would have received something in the mail. Number four, he's never in his life filed for bankruptcy. So we file the case. 2 years in, the stay gets lifted because he left her in charge of the finances. One of the other issues, it looks like she used or forged the power of attorney to be able to sign on his behalf. Now, you can file bankruptcy for a husband or a wife. They don't necessarily have to file together.
Okay.
But I do tell any potential clients that we do have to look at the finances because bankruptcy is based on household finances.
Right.
So we have to look at what do both spouses earn. So we don't have to file for both, but we need pay stubs for both. We need joint tax returns. We need the financial information for both. And it was actually funny. I've told this story before on the show as well. Before same-sex marriage was permitted, before it was legal, I filed for one half of a gay couple. And it was two men. Not that that's really relevant.
Right.
So the one was a realtor, and this was right in the middle of the crash. So he made absolutely no money.
Right.
The other was very successful and had like a six-figure a year salary. And so we file as a 7 because number one, they're not married, so we can't file together. And number two, the one was a realtor, made no money.
Okay.
The United States trustee challenged me on it because it's the household that brought in the money.
Okay.
And I said, but the realtor has no money. How can you? And the U.S. trustee said, look, if the one that makes no money doesn't have enough money to buy groceries for that month, is the household going to starve? Well, no. If the one who's a realtor who has no money doesn't bring home enough to pay the electric bill, is the one that makes $100,000 going to allow the electricity to get shut off?
Right.
No.
Okay.
And so on that logic, we had to include both salaries, which kind of kicked him out of a Chapter 7 and forced us into a Chapter 13. Now, the marriage is allowed. And again, we go back to that analysis of you can file for one spouse without filing for the other.
Right.
But still, I mean, even in a situation like that, if one doesn't work and the other works, you should still be open about finances because if bankruptcy becomes an issue, I'm going to need the finances of both.
Makes sense. You would think like, oh, this is so easy, right? I just file for bankruptcy, or we go and But there's so much into the process that a lot of people are just not aware of. So that for me was that's a great story there, my friend.
Yeah, you just got to understand and go to an attorney who's done it before. Let us kind of navigate you through it.
But the other thing is listen. I think the other thing that I think we talk a lot. Everybody has their opinion. But we tend to forget on the listening piece. So thank you for listening to this podcast. We appreciate that. That's very, very well appreciated. But the other thing, too, for me is if you don't know your finances today, please go and figure that out. Take a bank statement, take a look at it, see where the money's being sent, where the savings are, your 401k, any of those kind of things that has money that's tied to you. Take a look at it. I mean, it's good to be able to we think setting it and forgetting it is the way to go. gets us into trouble most of the time.
Well, unexpected stuff
Yeah.
always comes up. I mean, this trip to Tallahassee, they were unexpected. I spent almost $50 at a Chick-fil-A in the stadium.
Dang.
$50
in the stadium. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
You want to
okay.
know what I bought?
I'm assuming napkins and a soda.
3 chicken sandwiches,
Okay.
2 bags of potato chips,
Okay.
3 bottles of water.
Oh wow. Okay, $50.
$50.
Wow. All right. I thought you'd throw in another hoagie or something in there. But okay.
It was nuts. The other thing that was kind of funny, we were at the bookstore, got my older son a FSU shirt. He'd outgrown all the other ones, which is almost kind of a crime in my house. But so I bought him an FSU shirt, and I had one of those black drawstring, vinyl bags.
The bags, yes.
The book bag thing.
Okay.
The stadium only allows clear bags into the stadium. And so they had a clear bag with the handle had the FSU logos and licensing on it.
Okay.
And so I was asking at the bookstore, can I bring this black vinyl bag in? They said, no, it's not clear. I said, okay, give me one of those clear bags. Took the black vinyl, stuck it in the clear bag, walked right in the stadium.
And that worked.
It worked.
Oh my goodness.
The guard was like, what's in there? So I opened up the plastic bag, opened up the vinyl bag, and all it was, the game was delayed for an hour and a half because of rain. So we had our rain ponchos.
Gotcha.
That was all. We had our rain ponchos. We had the shirt that my son took off to put on the FSU shirt. And that was it.
Dude, that is the great end the podcast with the greatest story in
My buddy was like, leave it to the attorney to figure out the loophole in the bag policy rule at the stadium.
It's a clear bag, although it's a bag in a bag in a bag.
You said all my stuff needed to be in a clear bag. It's in a clear bag.
You didn't specify it needed to. Okay.
So before we wrap
Brilliant.
this up, I do have to give some love to our other sponsor, Mark Purvis. He's got a website called legacyspotlight.com where what he'll do is he'll capture your stories, whether you want to capture your stories for future generations or whether you want to capture previous generations for future generations. Mark is a 20-plus year Emmy Award-winning videographer. He'll get you all his camera equipment, all that stuff. He makes it fun, and he'll record your family stories for generations to come. So you can go to legacyspotlight.com if you're interested in that. And if you think we sound good, you can thank Mark. If you think we sound bad, it's George's fault.
It's my fault.
So other than that, I think we've pretty much put a bow on this week's episode. Anything else, George?
I got to say thank you for the stories. It's always you're still learning something through it, and we get a laugh out of it, and that's what I'm hoping we all get from this episode.
If there's one thing I will say, I get bankruptcy is a serious topic.
It is.
Finances, money, relationships is a serious topic, but sometimes you got to have a sense of humor to make it through the day.
Little fun, buddy. I love the idea.
Yeah. Anyway, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. Again, patreon.com/crushingdebt if you want to give some support to me and George or just listen, subscribe, share the show with other people that you think may be interested. But other than that, we hope that at the end of the month you have more money rather than at the end of the money you have more month. And we'll talk to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Shawn or connect with us on social media. Shawn Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.